The Swindle is all about clambering and sliding, jumping and then falling. It's a game in which you batter tiny mechanical security guards with a truncheon. It's grimy and it's steampunk and it's very, very British. Invisible Ink, on the other hand, exists somewhere in the near future. Here the environments are much more sterile, brightly lit, humorless. It's also a turn-based tactical game that has you controlling not one character, but rather a small team of them. What I'm trying to say is these games don't appear very similar at first glance, but they do in fact share a few core ideas, and those ideas are bloody interesting. So let's talk about them. Once you look past the aesthetic, you'll realise that the Swindle and Invisible Ink are fundamentally all about stealing stuff in order to prepare for a difficult final mission. And in both cases, that final mission is preceded by its own doomsday-styled countdown. In Invisible Ink, that means being told that you've got 72 hours until you need to break into the most secure supercomputer in the world, whereas in the Swindle, it works slightly differently, but with a similar end result. Here, you're given 100 days to steal an item known as the Devil's Basilisk from a misguided and worryingly robotic Scotland Yard. The same basic principle applies to both. You can't access that final mission right away, and even if you could, you'd be woefully unprepared for it. These games end up being all about preparation. But aren't most games? Well, sort of. I mean, you're often building towards a finale, but it's the countdown here that makes things interesting, that makes players do weird stuff. So the thing about these standard missions, or these heists, or these levels, whatever you want to call them, is that in both examples, you get to decide when enough is enough. You decide when you should leave. In the Swindle, that means getting back to the starting point of the level and boarding your shuttle that's waiting for you, and in Invisible Ink, it means finding the exit elevator. Now that can sometimes be a little trickier than you'd like, as the levels are procedurally generated, but sometimes you'll just stumble upon them right away, maybe even in your first turn, meaning that if you wanted to, you could leave right then and there. But you'll never do that. In fact, because you know you're working with a limited time frame, it can be extremely difficult to leave missions behind without first grabbing every last penny. You know from the start that you don't have an inexhaustible supply of these missions. That's the whole point, and so you want to make each of them count. These games aren't, for example, Dragon Age Inquisition, where the end of the world will happily wait for you to grind those few extra levels. The end of the world is 72 hours away, or it's 100 days away, and you need to be ready because the game won't care if you are or not at that stage. So you won't want to leave anything behind, but maybe sometimes you should. In both games you'll find that missions contain these certain key objectives, right? It might be a lucrative vault full of credits in Invisible Ink, a hostage that needs to be rescued, or even just a shop that sells really good items and upgrades. In the Swindle, it's all about these computers. Hacking one of those nets way more money than you'll get from the bundles of cash lying on the floor, and yeah, it can be incredibly difficult to ever leave these kind of things untouched. And yet because of the way in which both games generate their levels, caution can sometimes be the wiser option. Maybe that hostage is just too far away from the escape point, or getting to that computer would involve fighting too many guards. And so, if you have the willpower, you can turn around and leave, cut your losses, but survive. And I don't always do the sensible thing at this stage. So what's the downside? Well, dying in the Swindle means losing any money that you're carrying at the time, potentially wasting one of your days entirely. You'll also lose the character, which can sting too. They gain experience over time, which leads to additional money being earned from each heist, but perhaps, more importantly, you grow quite attached to them, with their randomly generated names, and maybe you just like that this one is wearing a little hat. And with Invisible Ink, the punishment can be quite a bit more severe than that. Because you take all of your agents along to every mission, if you do lose them all, it's game over, but sometimes, oh god, sometimes you screw up just badly enough that you can't get everyone to the escape point, but you can get some of them there. So you end up in a situation where you may need to leave one or two behind, and with these characters, you have likely made some rather expensive investments, either for upgrading their stats or buying new items. I said it stings in the Swindle when you lose your little chap and his little hat, and it does sting. Well, losing agents in Invisible Ink leaves you feeling just a bit hollow. I've played through both of these games several times now, and I've been in this exact situation, well, more than once, and the thing that continually impresses me about both the Swindle and Invisible Ink is that when this happens, I usually find myself not wanting to blame the game, but instead knowing that I've been too greedy or too reckless. Despite there being very clear moments when you know you should probably start working towards an escape, either after being spotted in the Swindle and knowing that the police will soon arrive on the scene, or if the alarm level has just creeped up a little bit too high in Invisible Ink, bringing with it heavily armed reinforcements. I don't always leave. I stick around just a little bit longer. Maybe I'm after one of those key objectives that we talked about, or sometimes I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything exciting in the areas I haven't looked at yet. It's strange. I find myself reminded of a younger Chris Pratt standing in front of a roulette table. I was up, but I wasn't up as much as I could be, and that's an incredibly difficult feeling to walk away from. And it's because these games have a time limit, because they tell you that you're working towards a final objective that's going to be really tough, and you need to be prepared for it. You don't ever just want some of the loot from each level, you want everything, because you tell yourself taking a few extra risks right now means that you'll have an easier time once you finally get there. Now, I do feel a bit weird about making that comparison to gambling because, well, I run the risk of leaving some of you with the impression that the Swindle and Invisible Inc. are taking advantage of you. But you know they are. It just happens to be in a way that I find interesting to experience. These games play on the fact that human beings can be incredibly greedy creatures. They understand that if the right rewards are offered, the right motivations provided, players will sometimes take huge, stupid risks. And that is exactly what a game about breaking into banks and casinos and mega corporations should probably be all about. Risk, reward, and greed. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, you might like to check out some of the other stuff we've done on these two games, including that one right there, which is a joint commentary with the developer of The Swindle. If not, you could always subscribe for similar stuff later down the line. Cheers!